Hard at work. Hey there.
No, they're Chuck Berry. They can be anytime. Oh, they can be cool. They have to come up with like a research plan. It's not like a graduate student. They have to come up with a research plan. They have to research.
Go Tim.
They have to do all this. They have to present it. There's superiors. You have to come up with a very strict guideline as to due dates and what to turn in and how you're going to do all the rest and this and that and the other. This Eric was actually did. We signed him up for that, not realizing what it was. And, bad. Yeah. Now, wait. Debate. What about debate 4? Because Nick will actually be in debate 4 next year. So often.
Hey.
Hey.
What?
Hey, rewind it real quick.
Those boots? They're ugly? What you
Oh
want?
man, they're horribly ugly, but they're kind of cool though.
Give me the Naya.
Be valued above the government regulation of that medium. To see why we must affirm today's resolution, we must look towards the following. The value of freedom of expression, in which freedom is the power of acting, Black's Law Dictionary, and expression is the manner in which one expresses oneself, especially in speaking or performing, American's Heritage Dictionary. Together, basically, the right to speak and express myself without any restrictions. To justify freedom of expression, we must look towards the value criteria of individual autonomy, defined by Black's Law's right or power to self-government. The observation for today's debate is that the responsibility of an individual autonomy. The responsibility of individual autonomy is basically to protect those who do not have all the knowledge, such as your kids. And it basically deals with your kids. If I'm their legal guardian, then I must help them through difficult situations. This is used in terms of the internet. If my kids are getting on there looking at stuff that they shouldn't see because it could violate their right to progress and mature and hurt them as a whole, then I must be responsible and act them and show them what is right from wrong and show them what not to do and what to do so they can learn and to mature into adulthood and make their own decisions later in life. Contention 1. Freedom of expression is necessary for a self-representation form of government. This just shows why we must allow freedom of expression. A. Not allowing freedom of expression silences the voice of the people. If we do not allow people to express themselves, no matter what it might be, until it infringes on certain rights, then we must allow the voice of the people to be heard so we can see their different views on situations and show what they want and be able to represent them to the fullest of their ability. B. Without the voice of the people, self-representation is out of reach. Basically, the government cannot do what we want or do the best they can unless they know how we feel and what we want. In many situations, they look for the people, and this is the best form of government working today. So if they don't know what the people feel is correct or what they want, then they cannot have a good government and work fully and show the guidelines and set the guidelines of which the people believe. C. Without freedom of expression, the government for the people is impossible. If we do not allow people to speak out and show what they want and we silence their voice, then a government for the people is impossible because they cannot fully represent us to all of our needs. Contention 2. The right to express ourselves on the internet does not infringe on anyone's rights. A. Access to the internet is voluntary. For me to get on the internet, I must turn on the computer, put in a password, and then get on the internet. All the sites which contains adult material, most have regulations in which you have to be so old and have credit cards to guarantee this. And you have to pay for all these sites, such as the pornography. You must pay for this. So a kid cannot access this, and there are protections against this. But for me to get on and say that it infringes on my rights and that we shouldn't have it, we must regulate it, is wrong because I allowed myself to access this. B. You make yourself accountable for material that is harmful. Once I enter this site, if it infringes on my rights, if I was black, and I'm black, if I'm black, then I go to a KKK membership and I press enter and look it up, and I find material that is unsuitable to my needs and I feel is harmful, it's my choice. I've made myself viable to these certain situations. C. Entering a site is your choice. This goes back to self-autonomy. If I don't want to see it or I feel they could infringe on my rights, then I wouldn't go there. So it does not infringe on anyone's rights unless you allow it to. Contention 3. Individual autonomy is the only way to regulate the internet. A. We must agree to assume that bad stuff is everywhere. We must look at drugs. People feel that it's bad. But still, the government has tried to regulate it and make it illegal. But drugs are still out there, and I can make myself available to this, and it can harm me. Such as weapons, we feel that this is bad and shouldn't be. We feel that we should outlaw weapons, but still, we can get to it. Me being underage, I can still get access to weapons. So bad stuff is everywhere. It's just if you make yourself viable or available to these situations, then it is your fault. And that's where it goes back to self-autonomy or individual autonomy. If I allow myself and govern myself to this, then yes, bad things could happen to me, but it's all voluntary. So they cannot regulate something that I access myself to or allow myself to be available to. B, making yourself available to these things is your fault. Once again, to show that I agree, like the guidelines of the internet, in which I have to enter so many rooms before I can get to the actual room and go through all these searches to find this, then it's my fault. If I feel that it could infringe on my rights, then I wouldn't go there. But just to silence the voice of people who do believe this, just take away their right to do this is unjust. C, self-governing yourself and protecting your kids is your responsibility. To bring it back into my observation, to show that I'm responsible for my kids. If they're accessing something that can be harmful to them, then it is my fault because they don't know the right decisions to make. And kids don't automatically know what decisions to make, so we must help them and guide them to become young, mature adults. And this is why, since the internet is all voluntary and I allow myself to be available to this, that we should affirm today's resolution that freedom of expression via the internet ought to be valued above government regulation of that medium. Now stand open for cross-examination.
Your value is freedom of expression, right?
Correct.
How do you define this?
How do I define freedom of expression? I define freedom by Black's Law Dictionary is the power of acting, and expression is the manner in which one expresses oneself. And basically, it's just the power for me to speak out and express how I feel.
Okay, are there restrictions on freedom?
On freedom?
Right.
Yes, there are restrictions on freedom.
Okay, your value criteria of individual autonomy, how did you define autonomy?
Autonomy is the right of self-governing.
Okay, thanks.
Sure will. Fine.
Can you count my prep time breaks again? I'm also really good at this time.
40 seconds news. Minute news.
Nega. I stand resolved that freedom of expression via the internet ought not be valued above the government regulation of that medium. Value, safety, defined by Webster's New Universal Unabridged Dictionary, 2nd edition, as the quality or condition of being safe, freedom from danger, injury, or damage, security. Value criteria, protection, to guard or shield from injury. Contention 1, safety is innate. According to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in his view of the social contract in nature, the first value of humans is self-preservation, to be safe from the threat of death. This is why people form societies. According to Thomas Hobbes, also a former of social contracts, every action by a human is determined by his need for safety and is justified to protect that safety. and most importantly, safety is low on Maslow's hierarchy of values. This means that if security is not achieved, higher values such as individualism, freedom, or self-actualization will not be met. Subpoint A, safety is more important than freedom. The social contract tells us that in the state of nature, man is totally free. However, when dealing with other humans, this freedom can take the state of war, chaos, and death. In order to decrease these bad things, man gets together, loses some of his freedom by government, but receives in return safety from these bad things. Locke, Mill, and Bentham agree. For the sake of example, all nations in the world, whether oppressive or not, wish to have some sort of security from hostile nations, poverty, disease, and drought. Contention 2. When speech causes harmful action, it should be restricted. Holmes agreed that in certain circumstances, when speech is closely related to action and might induce harmful consequences, it should be curtailed. In a similar way to the million corn dealer example, Holmes asserted that in a renowned opinion we cannot allow falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater. Here too, a restriction on speech is justified on the grounds of the content of the speech, its effects, not its intrinsic value, the manner of the speech, and the intentions of the agent are aimed to bring about harm. The audience is under conditions which diminish its ability to deliberate in a rational manner, so such a shout might lead it to act in a manner harmful to themselves as well as to others. Hence, to the extent that speech entails an immediate effect, the arguments which again assign special status to freedom of speech are less compelling. Boundaries have to be introduced in accordance with the context of speech, otherwise the results bound be too risky. Smoking is all right, but not in Powder Magazine. This is just saying that if speech is harmful, then it has to be regulated because that's infringing on the people's rights. Contention 3. Harm is the only justifiable reason to limit speech. So much for the speech-conduct distinction. The only non-absolutist alternative to an approach that looks at free speech value would be this. All speech stands on basically the same footing. We will not look at value at all. The only relevant issue is of harm. Speech may be regulated if government can make a demonstration that the speech issue will produce sufficiently bad consequences. Would it not be possible and desirable to have a single-tier First Amendment, in the sense that all speech is presumed protected, but we allow government to regulate speech in those rare cases where the harm is very great? This is just saying that harm is the only reason we should limit speech, and if harm is present, then we must limit speech. Subpoint A. Should restrict speech which causes psychological harm. My suggestion will be that there are grounds for abridging expression not only when the speech is intended to bring about physical harm, but also when it is designed to inflict psychological offense, which is morally on a par with physical harm, provided that the circumstances are such that the target group cannot avoid being exposed to it. The term morally on a par with physical harm comes to mean that just as we view the infliction of physical pain as a wrongful deed, seeing it as the right and the duty of the state to prohibit such an infliction, we should put boundaries to expressions designed to cause psychological offense to some target group. Subpoint B. Hate speech leads to large-scale violence against certain groups. Even a cursory look at American history establishes that expressions of hate have led to the wholesale devaluation of peoples based on group membership, and which in turn have led to wholesale legal, cultural, and societal state-sanctioned violence against those very peoples. The American ethos is rooted in state-engendered ideologies of hate which have historically nurtured, rationalized, and institutionalized slavery, lynching, and segregation. The genocide and subjugation of Native American people, the exploitations of and violence against immigrant workers, and the subjugation, physical abuse, and rape of women. Witness, for example, the following historical facts. The Ku Klux Klan, the Trail of Tears, the nativist anti-immigrant movements, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the rule of thumb beatings. Some of these views were ratified in the Constitution and its interpretation by the Supreme Court. The principle that Negroes were counted as 3/5 of a man for the purposes of census taking, that women were not individuals with suffrage but were part of the political family. The principle articulated in the slaughterhouse cases that there was no right to work, and later in constitutional history and related to that principle that poverty was not a suspect classification for equal protection purposes. What I'm proving in my case is that in order to actually limit, the purpose to limiting this freedom of expression is only if it gives harm, and I've proven in my last petition how it does give harm. Moving on to my opponent's case, his value of freedom of expression. Now, my opponent said that there are limits on freedom. That is exactly right. We must restrict this freedom because it gives harm. That's the purpose of restricting freedoms, is to protect the people. For his value criteria was individual autonomy. Individual autonomy wouldn't work in this case because my opponent brings up the example of parents watching over their kids. Now, your parent isn't always going to be over your shoulder every time you get on the computer. Your parent's not going to always be there, so that's not going to work because you can get on the computer at school or whatever. Cross apply that argument to his observation 1, and also because some parents are more strict on things like that, while other parents might not care as much. It depends on from family to family about what kind of restrictions there's going to be. His contention 1 is that freedom of expression is necessary. That's exactly right. In order to have a democratic society, we must have freedom of expression. However, it must be devalued, it must be lowered when we're looking at the harm of other people. It's important, it's an important thing, but safety is definitely more important. His contention 2 is that expression, if we have expression, it won't infringe on other people's rights. And he brought up that it's voluntary to go to these sites. However, when you go to a site and you click on a link, you don't know exactly, it says it's going to take you someplace, but it might take you somewhere else. And he brings up that you have to pay. That might be so in most cases. However, he did state in most cases. Now, if you just go to a link, you're not going to have to pay because you don't even know you're going to go there, and all of a sudden, some kind of hate speech or pornography pops up and you have no idea where it came from. His contention 3 was that individual autonomy is the only way to regulate. No, it does not work. Individual autonomy would not work. Your parents aren't always over your shoulder, and not everybody is as moral as my opponent would like them to think. I'm not a cross-examination.
Do you have a religious standpoint? Just wondering, are you like Christian or Baptist or?
Sure.
You are? And you believe that your ways are correct, right?
My religious views?
You might talk this over the internet or make up a site based on your religion, correct?
Right, but I'm not closing myself. I'm not saying that anybody else is wrong. I'm not saying that they're totally wrong. I'm open to what they believe because that's what they believe. They might think what I believe
you
is
talk
wrong.
about free speech. I was just wondering because there are different views. That's what I'm bringing up right now. That you state all throughout your case there is speech that could infringe on people's rights, but you never based what speech. What speech would you base this on?
My whole contention 3 brought up that kind of speech.
Brought up slavery.
Slavery, not only slavery, but
basically that people may talk degrading to a certain race. Would you agree with that? And that's when we might have to limit that?
not
right?
only racism, but pretty much that, yes.
Okay, and we can all believe that slavery is bad, correct?
Right.
And is slavery allowed anywhere?
Not in the United States
So what is
anymore.
this speech infringing upon?
Because, see, this was a historical perspective. What I was bringing
Does
up.
this have to do with the internet?
What I was bringing up is that there are sites for like the Ku Klux Klan, and this is just showing how.
Now, is the Ku
this
Klux
is showing how
Klan-
hate speech.
Do they have slaves?
No, what I'm saying is that this is showing how hate speech, because this is how it was all started with hate speech, leads to large-scale
Now,
violence.
if you don't like this hate speech, and you were a member of the opposite race or the race being degraded, would you make yourself viable or allow yourself to enter this site?
If you, like I stated, if you go onto a site and you click on a link,
Now, what
anybody
site would
can-
link you to the KKK?
I wouldn't know. However, people, somebody might do it just to pull a prank or whatever.
And you
Somebody
stated,
might just change it.
you stated that individual autonomy would not work because parents can't always watch over you.
Right.
Now, if your parents teach you right from wrong, would you like not listen to them, or would you go against them?
Everybody's parents try to teach their kids right and wrong. However, as we can see
So
in
whose
today's
fault would
society,
it
it
be?
doesn't always
Whose
work.
fault would it be if they made themselves available to this? If they pressed the button, wouldn't it be their fault?
If they didn't know where it was taking them, no, it wouldn't be their fault.
Now, wouldn't they know when it was taken them?
Like
It wouldn't
I
take you
stated.
to a pornography group unless it would say adult XXX in this site, and then you would press the button.
It
correct?
always says that.
Yes, it does. It has available the link in which you're going to go.
No, see, because
Okay,
there's always sites that have.
You saying that they can do stuff at school. Now, isn't there teachers who act as legal guardian at that time that limits your ability to access this stuff at school?
Right. However, some teachers aren't as strict, and they'll just tell you, okay, go to the library.
Okay, and guns, we
find
all
it.
agree that guns are bad, but are they still accessible, and aren't drugs still accessible? But it's when you're providing protection. Now, we stated that drugs are bad, but isn't it my self-governing that will eliminate drugs from me altogether? If I don't want to do drugs, then I won't do them, correct?
Right. However,
So
in
isn't
the
that the
case of the
ultimate means of
internet,
safety?
excuse me?
Isn't that the ultimate way to achieve safety?
No, not through.
Then how would you regulate, or like how would you oppose to regulate this if you know you can still access
You
it?
would make stricter governmental laws.
Because you're
and
still
when
accessing.
you, instead of, because teenagers are available to get guns, instead of making them that available, the government would have to regulate them stricter.
2 minutes and 20 seconds to use.
I'm going to go over my case and go on to review my opponent's case. First, her text on my value of freedom of expression. She said that I stated that there are limits on protection of people. Yes, I did state that there are limits, but if she would ask me to show when there are limits, it's when it would directly infringe. I cannot yell nigger because it's derogatory and it infringes on someone's rights, but I can write it on this piece of paper as much as I want because that's my right to express myself, and it does not infringe on people's rights. Basically, that's what the internet is. I can print this, and if I don't want to access this, then I don't go there, and I don't allow myself to be available to this. But I cannot limit someone else's freedom to speak because if it wouldn't have to do with slavery, because I don't believe that slavery would come back, but on a different governmental view, then yes, people should be able to talk because it could change. It could be a better government. And if we silence their voice, then it wouldn't change anything. And that's what my opponent is missing, is that there are limits on freedoms, but it's when it directly infringes. If you're going to make yourself available to this, then it's your fault for this right. It's your fault for infringing on this. Value criteria, individual autonomy. She used this in my observation and my value criteria that it doesn't work. Parents can't always watch over your kids. That's why you teach them morals. If you believe that nudity is bad, then you regulate nudity and you don't let them go to nudity, and you teach them that nudity is bad. But if you do agree that, okay, you can see this, just not so much of it, then it's regulated. That's the only way to regulate it. And it's based throughout my case that if, like drugs, the government tried to regulate them and said that drugs are illegal. But yes, they still are available. And you just got to teach your kids and tell them that drugs are bad and teach them morals that drugs are bad, then they wouldn't do it. It's just self-governing. And that's the only way to logically to restrict the internet. Contention 1, she didn't attack my A, B, or C, which proved it. She attacked my tagline, which freedom of expression allows for separate representation. She said it must be lowered at the risk of safety. No, there is no safety being lost. No one's being restricted. As I've shown that if you're going to make yourself available to this, it's your own fault. But the only way to regulate this truly is self-government or individual autonomy. She didn't attack A, silence is the voice of the people. B, self-representation is out of reach, and C, government for the people is out of reach. And the government can't completely do it. And if we're going to see our own views, then that's the only way the government can technically regulate or logically regulate us. Contention 2, she only attacked my tagline. It's voluntarily and does not infringe on any other's rights. She said links could take you somewhere, but they have addresses which will say, it'll say big boobs or triple X, or it'll say slavery, or it'll say KKK, and it'll be in the link. It says link, and then it has an address for it, so you can tell by the address. And if you want to make yourself available to that, then once you see that it's something that you don't like, then you press stop and you go back. And that's what my opponent is missing. Contention 3, she argued my tagline again, dropped my A, B, and C arguments that individual autonomy regulates the internet. She goes, not all morals work. But yes, people have different morals, but that's the only way to regulate it. If I believe that yes, racism is good, then the only way for me to technically allow my opponent or allow my kid to racism, and I'm going to teach him that. But he can't go out and use racism because slavery is not acceptable in public. But we can still have these views. It's just when it infringes on another's right is when there's limits on freedoms. Basically, on to my opponent's case, your value is out of safety. As I've shown, it's not being violated or value criteria of protection. Either if you go there and it's something that you don't like, then you press stop and go back. It's all voluntary. If you're going to allow yourself to have this link come up, then it's your fault. And that's what my opponent's basis is. And what if a link takes you somewhere? Well, it wouldn't take you somewhere, and if it did take you somewhere that you didn't like, then you just press back and stop, and you're out of it. Contention 1, safety is nature, society is based on safety. Yes, but if there's a cliff, it could hurt their safety, but that doesn't limit the cliff from being there. Like a knife, knives are allowed to be, we use knives, and that could infringe on someone's safety, but that doesn't make them unjust. Contention 2, when speech causes bad reactions, as is shown, you make yourself available to these bad reactions. That's why we should affirm the resolution.
Can you call it this number, please?
One minute remaining.
to some key voting issues. My opponents value freedom of expression. He refuses by saying that it doesn't directly infringe on other people's rights if we have freedom of expression. However, I've proven in my third contention that it does directly infringe on other people's rights. It could cause psychological harm, and hate speech has been proven through the history of the United States to lead to large-scale violence, such as the Ku Klux Klan, the Trail of Tears, things like that. They started from hate speech, just somebody saying something, somebody expressing themselves. His value criteria is individual autonomy. I said that this could not work, and he brought up again that parents would have to teach their children morals. However, not all parents are as moral as my opponent would like to think. Not all parents care that much about their children. Not all parents, some parents might put this stuff on the internet. My opponent is making a hasty generalization, and that's illogical. His contention, one, was that freedom of expression is necessary, and I stated that, right, but in order to have freedom of expression, it cannot degrade safety, it cannot limit safety, and my opponent states that there's no safety being lost. I've just shown how safety is being lost. We are losing our protection of the society because of hate speech and things like that, because of pornography. His contention, one, was that expression does not infringe rights. Expression lets you exercise your rights. However, I brought up, and he stated that the internet is voluntary, and I brought up links. And he stated his attack against this was that on addresses you can see where you're going to go. However, on any kind of address, it's not going to tell you exactly where you're going to go. They can name it anything they want. That's an illogical argument. Moving on to the negative case, my value of safety. He stated that it's not violated. However, I've proven that it is violated through hate speech, through pornography. You cannot protect your children or yourselves from this. His value criteria, or my value criteria of protection, he brought up that in order, you can just, if you go to a link or a site that you don't want to go to, you can just press it off and go back. However, you've already been, once you see where you're going, the damage has already been done. You've already seen what you were going to see, and you don't know that you don't want to go there until you've read a little bit of it, or you've seen something of it. The damage has already been done. You've already been psychologically harmed, or you've already had somebody else's opinion enforced upon you that you might not have wanted to hear, or that somebody might have wanted you to believe. My contention, one, was that safety is innate, and he brought up that a cliff is there and it could hurt you, or knives are there and they could hurt you, but it doesn't make them unjust. That's right. However, when you start to exploit these and you use them in the wrong manner, that's when they become unjust. And if you are using your freedom of expression on the internet, that is to exploit children, or to use pornography, or to give hate speech, that's when it becomes unjust. My opponent didn't attack my contention 2 or contention 3, so I'd like you to flow those over. And I'd like to bring up a few key voting issues. First of all, safety is the utmost value, because with safety, we are achieving what the government was set out to do. With what the government is set out to do, they're there to protect the government, to protect the society, and also my opponent's value criteria of individual autonomy, it would not work, because not everyone is as moral as my opponent would like to believe, and parents aren't usually. Some parents are strict on some things, and some parents aren't as strict on some things. It's like curfew. Some people have a curfew, some people have no curfew. It's that kind of thing. Also, if we don't restrict this, it could lead to large-scale violence, which would directly harm everyone in this room. Because of that, large-scale violence, it would infringe on everyone's rights. And that is why we should go for the negative ballot.
Okay, you done? What do you guys
Oh
think?
my God.
You have
Take
40
the rest of my
seconds
time.
left.
Well, that's okay, I have lunch. I have lunch.
Okay, I'm going to go over F, neg, and then show why my opponent is irrational, and show some key voting issues. First, her attacks on my pretty much whole case was that, you know, it is available and it does hurt the safety. And yes, we can agree that it could hurt the safety. And to sum this up in one argument, we must look at a dog. A dog, if you got in its way, could possibly hurt this person. It could hurt me if I got in the dog's way. It could hurt me. But what my opponent is missing is the fact that I ignore the sign that says "enter at your own risk," and I jump a fence to get there. And that's what my opponent is missing. Yes, there is some harmful material on the internet, but if she's going to jump the fence and miss the sign, then it's her fault, and she made herself available to this. That's basically the whole arguments on my case, because she talks about it could attack, and there's not as many morals. But yes, people have different morals, but neither one is unjust. And that's what my opponent is saying, is morals do change. But that has nothing to do with regulating the internet. We still must allow everyone this right. So that is non-topical. She missed my contention 1, A, B, and C, which showed that we must allow the voice of the people to be heard. My contention 2, that it's voluntary and that it doesn't infringe on anyone's rights. And back to my dog example, you must jump a fence and ignore the sign to get there. Basically, that's the whole base of the case. It said it's not as moral, and I've shown how that's illogical. And look at my opponent's case instead of safety, as the dog example still applies to this, that if she's going to jump the fence and miss the sign, then it's her fault that she'll enter this. Her main source of this, or her main argument, her second main argument, is that there are links that could take you somewhere. And yes, there are links. But they will have an address, and they'll have a little sign that states what's in this and what harmful material could be here, or what material is in it. They're not just going to have, oh, click here if for any reason. They're not just going to say click here. They have a little address and a little poster sign. And that's what my opponent is missing, is that there are links that they signpost and have their little article. And even if you did go in this link, you could press stop and go out. And when it infringes you, once you see and it comes up and it has a big sign in bolded letters moving that says KKK, you're going to press stop if you don't want to see it. The key voting issues basically is the drops. My opponent dropped my A, B, and C on each contention of 3. I've shown how her attacks on my value is wrong, and she's missing the point that if she's going to jump the sign and if she's going to jump the fence and miss the sign, then it's her fault. And that's basically the key argument in today's debate, that she's missing all the basis of the case, in that if it's voluntary to get on the internet and there are harmful material, but to regulate this constantly and say no one can have the freedom to express themselves, that is unjust. And that's where individual autonomy ties back in. If everyone has self-governed themselves, then yes, if their parents feel that this is okay, then that's just to them, and that doesn't infringe on anyone else's rights if I stay out an hour later. And that's what my opponent is missing. So because of this, we should affirm today's resolution, which states freedom of expression via the internet ought to be valued above government regulation of that medium. Thank you.